Okay, so let's talk about rendering. Rendering is an important part of the process of making films in Maya or making animation in Maya. It's the very last thing we do. When you've done when you've created your models, you've rigged your characters, you've animated them, you've put some textures on them, you've lit them, and now the last thing you're going to do is render them out. And the answer to the question, what is rendering? Is essentially, rendering is rather like making a picture in the sense that you're basically taking 3D assets and then converting them into a flat 2D image. And it's essentially the same as what an artist does when they paint a picture. If you're out there painting a landscape, you are taking that landscape, which is a three-dimensional object, and you are reducing it to a flat 2D image. It's exactly the same as what a photographer does when they take a picture. You're taking a 3D environment and you're reducing it to a 2D image, and that's what rendering does. And renderers take all the 3D objects in your scene, and they collect together all of this information, all of this geometry and lights and cameras and textures, and they turn it into a flat 2D image. A renderer is the program which allows us to do that. So the renderer, and there are two main renderers in Maya, which will allow us to do that. And so the question is, how does it do it? How does a renderer work? Well, it essentially parses or reads the scene, and it creates images from the various technical descriptions of geometry, lights, materials, cameras, and so forth, and turns them into a flat two-dimensional image. So when you're rendering, you'll essentially have the option of using either the Maya renderer or Mental Ray, which comes with Maya, and you can use one or the other. And the Maya renderer is essentially a hardware renderer which uses the computer's graphics card, also known as the GPU or graphics processing unit. And the Maya renderer is fast and cheap. It is not as good as Mental Ray. And Mental Ray is a ray tracer. It comes free with Maya. You get it as part of the package. And it is a ray tracer, which means that it is calculating rays. It is calculating the way that light bounces from one object to another. This uses a different part of your computer. It uses the CPU, or central processing unit. And it is slow and expensive. But the image quality at the end tends to be better than you'll get with the Maya hardware renderer. So, if you think of the Maya renderer as being fast and cheap but relatively less quality, and Mental Ray as being slow and expensive but high quality, that gives you a working rule of thumb. There are other differences between the two, but that gives you a sort of general introduction to it. So what kind of images can we create using our renderer? And there's no real limit. You can, depending on what you do with the materials and the textures and the lighting, you can render out an almost limitless range of different styles depending on the look that you want. Now, of course, rendering for film and TV tends to take a while. We want the maximum quality image that we can get. But if you're playing a video game, you want a renderer which is much, much faster. And one of the skills in working in games is creating your materials and your rendering so that everything renders in real time. And now that computer quality or computer power is so much greater, we now have much better games quality than we used to. If the rendering for games is nowadays almost instantaneous. So let's talk about batch rendering. Batch rendering is when you render out all of the frames in your shot. And what you end up doing is creating a series of image files which can then be turned into a movie file. Now, there's a separate lecture on making batch renders, a technical lecture where I'll go through this in Maya. But here's a list of settings which you might want to scribble down or take a note of because it's useful when you come to making a batch render. And to make a batch render of your shot, you're basically going into your render globals, your global settings, and check the settings in there. You must make sure you've set your project in advance, because Maya is going to want to know where to put the images that it's created. If you haven't set your project, your images will go to some random place and you'll never find them. So under the Common Render Settings tab, you want to specify your file name, such as Ball Bounce or Monty Walk or whatever it is. And then under this tab, frame/animation.ext, you want to select name.hash.ext. Under image format, select TIFF. Check your start and end frames to make sure you are actually rendering out what you think you're rendering, frame 1 to 199 or whatever it is that you're interested in rendering out. Set your frame padding to 4 and make sure you're rendering from the right camera. That's down here in this menu here. Renderable cameras, shot cam. You probably can't see that because it's too small, but you want to make sure you're rendering from the correct camera and not from your perspective view or orthographic view or some other view that doesn't help you very much. Then you want to select your image size. 640 by 480 is fine. You basically want the 16:9 ratio. That could be 1024 by 576, or it could be I forget now. But you want that 16:9 ratio. You want to render in Maya software, or you can render in Mental Ray as you like. And then back in the render menu, in the main menu back in Maya, you want to go to Render, Batch Render Options, and reset the tool, hit Batch Render and close. And then you can monitor the results at the bottom of the screen. Bear in mind, rendering can take a while, so this is usually a good time to go and make a cup of tea. Anyway, that's a general introduction to rendering and what it does, and also a menu on how to do a basic batch render.